Well, the knock at the door video is about something that every law enforcement officer, whether you're a sheriff's deputy, a police officer, or a state trooper, every officer knows what the knock at the door means, and it's the delivery of a fatality message. Someone has been killed in an accident, most likely an automobile accident, but it could be another accident. And those of us who have worn the badge, we've all done it. Those who wear the badge today, they all have to do it. And it is absolutely one of the worst parts of the job. There has been some type of terrible accident where a fatality has occurred, or even a critical injury, but more often than not a fatality. And part of that officer's job during that process is to notify the next of kin. It is better done in person. Sometimes, rarely, it's done by telephone, depending on the proximity of the officer and the family. But more often than not, it's done in person. So as kind of a finality to working that accident, that officer is required to make that notification. We're constantly looking for something that will resonate with the public and to get them in a frame of mind where they want to comply with either the laws or the safety programs that the department puts forward. And you have to do something that makes an impact in order to do that. We know that our public service announcements have an impact. We know that they're watched by all age groups. So we search for the right message, and this is the message that you'll see from this conversation came up during those discussions. Well, here's something that I think we forget in the public safety field, particularly in law enforcement. But whether you're a sheriff's deputy, a police officer, or a state trooper, you're just representative of the population as a whole. Nothing more, nothing less. When you take the uniform off, you go home, you have your meals, you spend your time with your family, you do your public service projects in the community. You are a representation of that community. I really don't think law enforcement should be set apart. And sometimes I think police officers are dehumanized, but they're members of the community. And in order to have effective public safety and effective law enforcement, the community needs to feel like that officer is a part of them. That officer rose to the position that they hold from that community, from that population niche. So that's why I think it's important to constantly be working to humanize the police officer. As a Tennessee state trooper, I've delivered several death notices. I worked a year of permanent midnights, and it seems that your worst accidents sometimes happen in the wee hours of the morning. Usually I tried to take another officer with me, whether it be a sheriff's deputy or a police officer, because it was just so much more difficult to do it myself. But I can tell you that I have been to many doors in the middle of the night and during the day and delivered that terrible news. And it was always amazing to me, because many times I wouldn't have to say anything, particularly if it was in the middle of the morning. That family knowed what family member was out at that time of morning, and many times after the knock, when the person, the next of kin, come to the door, there was no need initially for me to say anything. The message was already delivered. And that's something that'll resonate with me the rest of my life. Well, there's no question, and not only do they have a personal reference to make, those that have experienced a knock at the door with the news, but for those who have not experienced it, it is a message that hopefully they will not want to experience. Number one, they will not want to be the subject of that message. So obey the traffic laws. Be safe, wear your seatbelt, don't drink and drive, don't be distracted. And then they would not want their families to receive this message. That's what we're trying to, the message that we're trying to send. So really it's for the person to encourage them not to be the subject of the message and not to put their families through this experience. My family did receive a knock at the door. It's not something that I talk about a lot, but I lost a 16-year-old brother in a car accident in 1966. I was 7 years old at the time. I remember the knock at the door, and I remember the heartache that I heard from my mother when the sheriff's deputy was delivering the message. It's something that 50 years later, I remember that night just like we're talking here today. In my mind, there's no way it's been 50 years, but that's what an impact it had on me. There were 6 children in my family. My brother Larry was next in age to me. I'm the youngest. He was 17 years old at the time and killed in a tragic car accident. So it's something that I assure you resonates with me.
Actually, Commissioner Perky and I were at a news conference, and he and I had been talking about the tragedy that he experienced with his brother. And I was sharing with him all the death notices I've delivered. I mean, I've delivered a death notice to one of my best friends, his son losing his life. And so after we had that news conference, I thought was a rather powerful news conference about the same issues we're talking about today. I called Commissioner Perky. I said, look, man, I'm driving down the interstate, and I just had passed the point where I had 2 officers killed in 2003. And I remember how difficult that was to deal with the families. So I called the commissioner, which he's been a state trooper, he understands this, he's wore the uniform. And so I got an idea. And he said, hey, I like it. So that's kind of where that came from. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. I've delivered a notice where 5 family members were killed in one accident. And I think what makes it so difficult is that a traffic accident is so unexpected. We expect it all the time, but it's really so unexpected. It's unlike any other death notice that I've delivered. I mean, I've worked a lot of homicides, had to deliver death notices. They're all painful. But it's when you're awoken in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day, or somebody comes to your office and has to tell you that news. It's extremely powerful. Or they're in the emergency waiting room and you're involved in the investigation. You've got to go out and tell a family. And I think what most people maybe don't see is like the officers portrayed these officers are portrayed in this film clip, is it doesn't just stop after the knock at the door. And then you go in and you've really, it's a little more traumatic once you get inside. I mean, the families have questions. They want to know what transpired, what happened, and that's why it's so important if the officer himself, who has worked the accident, can make that delivery. Because in today's media environment, with all the social media that's out there, oftentimes now the families are sometimes getting the notice before we've got a chance to get there. So the challenge is more difficult, but it's really hard on the officer too, and it's things you'll never forget about. Stay with you forever.
Well, the sheriff's right. I mean, it was there was a highway safety press conference, and again, I don't talk about it a whole lot, but I related the story about my brother, and then we had conversations afterwards about that. And in fact, he did call me. Just riding up the road, he had the idea to do this. It was his idea. He's been far too modest. And it was something obviously that resonated with me. And we discussed it with Vic and his staff in the Highway Safety Office and came up with a really good concept, and we couldn't be happier. Ransom is here with us today, one of the actors in the clip. We couldn't be happier with what the end product was, and we see it being viewed by thousands of people. We've had inquiries from other states about it, and it is the product and the message that we were looking for. So the sheriff's right. If you've delivered the message, then you have a heart for it. If you have received one of those messages, then you know exactly what the piece is about. And then the third part is you hope that it has an influence on those that to make people, to encourage people to comply with the law and to not drink and drive, wear their seatbelts, and not be distracted while driving, so those notices don't have to be made.
And we want the public to realize that officers are tender-hearted. Yes. Trust me. Yes. And we want the person who's also driving to know that they may be responsible for their mother or their dad or one of their children receiving that message. So the responsibility goes in so many different directions, and the way this particular advertising clip portrays it. It brings everybody into the process very quietly, very respectfully, brings everybody into the process. And so we don't want our family members, you know, the public should realize you don't want your family member to have a knock at the door because you were careless, because you didn't obey the law. At the same time, as parents, we need to have this conversation with our children. And I think the part about, I think when you first look at this video, you may think it's going to be the officer who maybe loses his life, or he's someone who's going to have a bad accident. But when you get to the end of the video, you realize that this is the officer delivering the message. He's got a small child. He's taken his small child to an overnighter. I mean, you know, everybody is human. And I think that's exactly what is portrayed in this particular film clip, is we all are human. And us in the law enforcement community never want to have to do another knock at the door, but they will be done because people do not think before they drink and drive.
Another thing, it also shows that when I've done it before, it's to the point where I feel everything. You know, it's not that I don't know what's going on. I've gone to doors before and I want to cry, but you can't do it. So that feeling stays with you. You know, several accidents I've been into, there's death there, and you take it home. And I was blessed to have a wife that was a police officer also that understood that, because a couple of friends of mine, the police officers, killed themselves because they couldn't bring the emotions out. I had somebody there that knew exactly how I was feeling, so we both shared each other, so we helped each other. And what they're doing is wonderful, because it brings into the effect as we human just like anybody else. We have feelings also. You know, right now they have out there, well, officers are bad. That's not true. You know, there are some out there, but majority, 99%, I feel, are out there doing their job. And everything that you see, that's one family, then there's another family. We have it all. So it's like not only just one family we feel for a lot of families. That's a lot of emotions to take in. So when I did that expression, I thought about what I've done before, and it was easy to do because I brought all of that emotion to me, and it was for real. So.
You know, I'll tell you something else too. I don't know, and I know Captain Donahoe, Big Donahoe has done this too, as Commissioner Perky. Sometimes the saddest thing probably for me is I can't remember all the names in this many years that I've done this, but I can remember the faces. And I can remember the children that might be standing with their parents, much like what the commissioner went through. There's just so much shock at that point in time. And we try to prepare our officers in our training process that you're going to have to do this. It's just not knock on the door and leave. As I said a while ago, you've got to go in and you've got to become counselor and pastor and psychologist, and you've got to become all in one at that very moment, because there's just so much uncertainty in those very few moments when you knock on that door. There's an uncertainty as an officer what you're going to experience when that door comes open. And maybe one of the toughest messages I ever delivered was over the telephone to someone out of state, someone I knew very dearly, and their child had been killed in a traffic accident. I'd been to the door and told his mother, and her husband was out of state. And she said, none of us, their pastor was there, their doctor was there, I was there. And no one had the courage to pick up the phone, not even the mother. And so death notifications will just stay with the people who deliver them. And I admire and respect our day-to-day law enforcement people. They do not get the credit they deserve, but they're doing a tough job out there on the highways trying to protect us. And I would encourage people who view this, who are real social media inclined, to share it. But at the same time, if they happen to be where one of these accidents have happened, I would encourage them not to share so quickly. That personal notification is so important. It's just so important that they get to speak with someone who knows something about the circumstances. And we hope that's what this message sends to everyone. But most importantly, don't drive under the influence, whether it's drugs or alcohol or whatever the situation may be. Taking too many lives in this country that could have been avoided.
We also know that 94% of these crashes are behavior related. And I think everyone knows or remembers that first knock as an officer when you deliver that first death notification. Back in 1989, when I was a very young trooper, my first death notification was a 9-year-old child on a motorcycle. My last death notification was a family of 4 in 2008 that were all killed in a two-vehicle crash. So you never forget some of those, your first and your last. There are several in between that become, I guess, I wouldn't say comfort. You don't have a comfort level of delivering these notices, but there's a different range. And that first one you always remember, and the last one I've always remembered. And then when you have a personal tragedy, that's something that you never, ever forget, just like the commissioner said. When it impacts your family, and everyone, or most families have the mindset, it's not going to happen to me, it's not going to happen to my family. But with the population, with the drivers, with the speeding, under the influence drivers that are out here, it's going to happen at some point. And as law enforcement officers, we need to do everything we can to prevent that.
You know, Vic, and also in over 40 years that I've done this, there's never been any two that's just alike. I think every death notification, no, Commissioner Perkins would say the same thing. There's no two of them just alike. The circumstances are different. The time of night is different. Time of day is different. How many people's in the house? Different social, economical background people. It just affects everybody.
Their reactions are different also. Some of them are just quiet and sit there, and some of them is just, it makes you, hysterical. And they get mad at us.
Yes.
But you sit there and listen to their vent. Once they finish venting, they're back to normal.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. With the child, the family just wanted to see their child. They wanted to go to the hospital and see their 9-year-old laying deceased on a hospital bed. The family of 4 that were killed, the mother and the sisters and the brothers and sisters, they wanted to know details of the crash. They didn't want to go see their family members at that point in time. They just wanted to know how it happened and why it happened, and was the family at fault. And it was a very tragic event that killed 2 children and their mom and dad, and their dad happened to be a pastor at one of the local churches. So that had even more of an impact. But I spent about an hour with this family discussing the details of the crash, and a lot of families want to know if it was avoidable. Was it an avoidable crash? Was it due to behavior? Was it my son's fault, or was it the family's fault? So those are things that really put pressure and make the officer or the one delivering the notice very, very humanizing because they have to relate to whatever the situation may be. And it may be a hysterical family that loses it, and it may be a very calm, like the 9-year-old parents. They wanted, the parents of the 9-year-old, all they wanted to do is go to the hospital. And I drove them to the hospital to see their son who was deceased. He was riding a motorcycle, and it happened to be a motorcycle identical to the one I had growing up when I was a little boy. It's a Honda XR80, little red motorcycle, and I never will forget it. The motorcycle stayed behind the local sheriff's department in Van Buren County for 2.5 years. The entire time the family didn't want the motorcycle, obviously. And it was just a very tragic event and took the life of a 9-year-old child.
You just never know when you're going to be called to do that. I told you earlier I delivered the death notice of 5. The trooper that was working the accident, I was out there, and he said, "Sheriff, I'm just so busy with this." He said, "Can you go to the hospital? And if the father lives, break the news to him." So I went to the hospital, and there were 4 dead children, and the gentleman's wife had passed away in the accident. And he was conscious, barely. And like Vic said, you know, inevitably, I think every time we've all done this, the first thing they want to do, they want to see their loved ones. Sometimes, so anybody that views what I'm saying, you probably don't need to see your loved ones, depending on the tragedy and how bad it was. But I'll never forget telling this gentleman the toughest news that any man's ever going to hear, that basically in the next room, all of your loved ones are gone. And he started pulling his IVs out and started just going into, we had to get, the doctor was there, and it was just, it was horrible. And again, like I said, when you knock on that door and it's a little kid you saw grow up and you watched him play baseball and you've been to his baseball games, and the trooper says, "Sheriff, you got to go with me. I know you know this family." And you go out there, and as soon as I walked up on the porch light came on. I mean, they know. They know you don't have to say a word. And it's all those emotions that go on at that point in time is beyond this video. After he knocks on the door, then some really tough work starts right there for all those officers involved.
And you know, I guess I'd make one comment. I know the question has been asked. Why did you have a state trooper, a sheriff's deputy, and a police officer represented? And the reason's very simple. Number one, all of those entities have to do these knocks at the door. But number two, you are much better off as an officer, if you're going to do this, if you're able to get someone to go with you. And more often than not, that's going to be a member of another law enforcement agency. So that happens routinely. It's not unusual. I remember a couple of times that I have asked other officers to go with me, and they have looked at me and said, "I was afraid you were going to ask me that. You know, I don't want to do this." And I've said, "Well, I just need you to help." And they'll say, "I'm going to do it, I just don't want to do it." And because it's, you know, again, as the sheriff says, it's one of the worst things you'll do as a law enforcement officer. And fortunately, we were able to get a man who has worn the uniform and experienced those emotions to have a very true representation of what the event is and what the event means. And we think he nailed it. We think he absolutely nailed it for the video. So good job, Ransom.
Let me expand on one thing I think the commissioner mentioned earlier, is that police officers, sheriff's deputies, probably know their communities more than troopers. However, troopers are part of those communities. That's why it is important that we have a relationship with our local law enforcement, because of these situations when we partner together to go deliver something this tragic to a family or to a family member, if it's just one person. So having the sheriff, most sheriffs across this state know a large population in their areas. Most chiefs of police and local police departments have a smaller geographical area. They know a lot of people in their areas. So it is important that we partner, that we share some of this responsibility with our locals. The trooper may deliver the death notice, but he may not be able to do that without the support of a sheriff or our local police officer.
And I tell you something else these officers do that nobody ever knows. Yeah, they deliver that message and they counsel with the families, but I don't think there's a one that I can ever remember, whether it's a trooper or a police officer or a sheriff's deputy, who didn't attend that funeral if they could. It just carries with you. I mean, if you love your community, as all of us here do, and he did an excellent job nailing the emotions of the moment. It carries with you just like the family, because you're part of that tragedy. The officer is actually part of the tragedy. And the worst part is when you roll up on a scene and you just see mangled bodies and you see all the things that are there, and you see that moment when you said, you know, this could have been avoided. This is just so unnecessary. Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Well, those are the same questions those family members ask themselves an hour or two after you've been on the scene. Why did it happen? Why did this have to happen? The officer actually thinks that thought process first, because he cares about his community, he cares about life, and that's the first thing through our minds. So tragic. And then, you know, the next phase is what we're trying to explain here to the public. So it's, I appreciate the efforts of the Department of Safety on behalf of the sheriffs in the state, and the acting jobs that were done in it, and the seriousness that's put into this, that everybody could be any of those people in that video. It could be the officer, could be the child that he's taking to the overnight. It could be his mom. It could be his neighbor. It could be him. And someone has to deliver that knock on the door. So it's I hope people view it and understand why we did it this way, and I'm honored that the Department of Safety took a shallow idea and made something good out of it.
My family had a very tragic event that happened back in August the 19th of 1983. My aunt and 2-year-old and 11-year-old first cousins were traveling from the county fair in Macon County on a 2-lane highway with paved shoulders, and a impaired driver, by all accounts, intentionally rounded a curve and hit their car. All 3 were deceased. It almost cut the car in half. The trooper that investigated that crash was a reconstructionist and a very good friend of the family's and mine, and he later resigned because of that tragedy. He worked at the Sheriff's Department then as a court officer, just to collect his thoughts for the next, I think is about 3 years, and I may not have the exact time frame, but he resigned from the Highway Patrol due to that tragic event. He still carried on with the prosecution, and to my knowledge, I believe General Thompson, Tommy Thompson of the 15th Judicial District, I think that's the first time in the state history of the state that someone was charged with second-degree murder out of a car crash. The witnesses in the vehicle with the guy driving who left the scene stated that he made a comment that he didn't care if he killed anyone, and he rounded a curve and never straightened his vehicle. It just appeared so intentional to hit the car, the driver's side door, and like I say, it almost cut the vehicle in half. The 2-year-old was properly in a car seat. The 11-year-old was in the front seat with a buckle, and the mom was unbuckled. But it killed all 3 of them. My uncle at that time, I never will forget the scream when he was told that his wife and 2 kids had been killed in a tragic car crash. Immediately he wants to, know where they are and who's responsible. He never recovered from that loss. He went to the jail with a shotgun after they arrested the man the following day to take out his own frustrations with the man. But the sheriff at that time was well known and talked to my uncle and knew my uncle, and it was able to talk him down. The following few months, my uncle tried drinking, became an alcoholic for about 2 years, lost his job, turned to the Lord, attended church for the next couple of 3 years, still without a job, or a few odds and end jobs back and forth. And then ultimately he had a car crash and died a few days later after a car crash at a young age, 60 years old. And I say that didn't just kill those three that night, it killed a fourth person. His quality of life was never the same. He never had any more children, and he just never recovered.
I assume you're going to ask me that question, so I'm going to jump ahead of you, okay? I probably haven't shared this publicly much except in my book. I know David read the book, but when I was just turning 10, my father worked at, we had a farm, small farm, and my father worked night work at Avco because there really wasn't much of a living on the farm even in the 50s. And back when Highway 70 in front of where the Law Enforcement Academy is today, where I've spent so much time in my career, he was in a traffic accident there. And I'll never forget the officer's black-looking patrol car in the 50s. I was out waiting for my daddy to return home from work. And I was out in the field, and I saw this car come down to my house, and I had an older brother who was 2 years older. And I could hear my mother crying. And the message is that your husband has been killed in an automobile crash. Ironically, they tried to keep it from me and my brother for, he's just been hurt. And I'm so glad that's how it went down, because my grandfather went to General Hospital here in Nashville, asked to see his son's body. And he was alone in the morgue with him, and he saw the sheet move. And my father was alive. But he spent the next 120 days in a coma. He spent the next 31 years in the VA hospital due to an impaired driver. So, as a kid that grows up and wants to be sheriff, everybody's got their calling. But my father spent 31 years in the hospital. Never knew much, never had much mobility, had a lot of strong will to live. He'd fought on Guadalcanal and Peleliu and Tarawa with the 1st Marine Division, World War II. He'd seen a lot. So there's tragedies out there. Here's 4 people sitting here that are passionate about what we're doing with this video. We've all experienced some terrible tragedies. And it's time people realize that there are other people on the other side of the door. It's us. And we want to tell them we love them. And that's why we're there.
Was set to be an average, everyday person. He was a police officer, but average, everyday chores, dropping off stuff to my mom's house, dropping off stuff that I borrowed to my neighbor, and dropping my daughter off to a birthday party. And it was making us seem like, humanizing us basically, as far as we are just like everybody else. We have everyday things that we do also. But at the end, we put that uniform on, we have to change. We can't be the same. I can't joke around or play around. I have to be serious. And when they put the issue of knock at the door, that was one of the serious issues. And I have to take whatever I did that day, leave it there, and become an officer. And also during that time as being an officer, you think about, you don't want to do it, but you have to do it. Because, like I said, death notification is, even at this point now, even I'm a former officer now, I had to do a death notification with my 16-year-old nephew, because my wife, she received a phone call, and it was just a regular old day. We was going home, just come from a dinner, and she received a phone call, and we're driving down the street. Next thing I know, she's screaming and hollering. I'm doing like this, thinking, what happened? So we pulled over to the side. I grabbed the phone, and her brother was telling her that our 16-year-old nephew is dead. And that was one issue, so I had to calm her down. I had to tell that same thing to my 16-year-old son and my 7-year-old son at the same time. And that was kind of difficult, because at that time, me being the person that I was, not an officer at the time, I could cry. And I did also. But I can't do that on scene if I'm somewhere else. I have to let them know that I'm their support. And you can't be their support if you're crying also at the same time. So you have to, like you said, be a preacher, be a counselor, and just be a comforter at that time. But when they called me about it, I thought it was a real good concept, because I've done it before. So I said, well, I'll probably get this part because I've been there and done that. And with God's blessing, I got the part. So, and I've shared it. Everybody I knew, people that I don't even know. You have Facebook? No. Well, turn this right here and see what you think about it. Have some guys come and say, I love it, I love it. He said, you did a good job. I said, I just love it. And then one guy said, I love what you did. I watched it, but I couldn't share it because I've had that situation, so I couldn't share it. But I love what you did. So that made me, when people come and say that to you, it makes you feel like I did a good job. Because like he was saying, everybody has a calling. And I would always ask my wife, I said, I wonder what am I here for? What is my purpose? I never knew what my purpose was. But everything I've done is to serve. I was in the military, 6 years Marine Corps, served the country. Got out of there, I went to the county as a correction officer, serving the people. Left there, ended up being a police officer. I'm still serving people. Okay, so I did that, and the same thing, I was talking to another gentleman. I became did construction, general contract license, and a realtor. I'm still serving people. So it's not what particular I do. God's saying, you're going to serve people. That is your job. Right now I'm at TVA as a security supervisor, serving people. So I said, and my wife said, you know what, that's your calling. Don't even ask no more. Your calling is to serve people. Jesus served people. That's what we're here for, to be a light to somebody else. This video could be a light, because people build themselves on emotion. No matter what you do about anything else, emotion is what get people to react. So that emotional scene at the end, people just like in awe, like, oh, I can't believe that. So they start thinking about it. Hey, everyday life, it could be anybody. It could be me, it could be you. So they're thinking maybe that'll come out. Then they start sharing and showing somebody else. So it has 11,000, almost 12,000 views. That's just people that view it. It's not telling how many people are sitting there watching them. Well, if it's 10 people watching them viewing it, then that's even more. And it's still probably getting hits and views and stuff like that. So the more, the better. So this right here, added to the viewing, added to what we're trying to do, it's out there helping somebody. It's going to be a light to somebody. Somebody might see that video and won't think nothing about it. And then all of a sudden, it'll resonate in their head. So it's a good thing to me. So that's why I wanted to do it, and that's why I'm glad I did do it. And like I said, it's a personal experience. I've done it before, so.
I think he nailed it when he said it leaves you thinking. I think at first you see it, especially if you see it more than once, you watch it because you didn't expect the ending. See, when that thing starts out, I mean, you're just regular old Joe doing regular old day stuff, And then in the end, regular old Joe is an officer. And I think at that very moment, it leaves the viewing public with, wow. And then I think exactly like how he just portrayed that. You may not think about it after you watch it that one time. Or it's like a good commercial you see. I'd like to see that commercial one more time. And we all remember those commercials that kind of stay with you. Most of them are Aflac, but I mean, but I think it leaves the viewing public. I think it raises a question. At any time that you can raise a question with the viewing public, it may raise a number of questions. But if it's raising the question or raising a thought process, then then the video is effective. And I think that's why it's getting the view time it's getting. He's a pretty good actor, you know.
Appreciate it, thank you.
He really did a good job.
And a friend of mine, when he first seen it, he's a security officer, he's my supervisor, he's seen it. He's, oh, it's a good video. He's, I done watched it about 10 times already, back to back. I said, okay. I said, okay. I received the call in the morning on the wreck. And I got there, and the gentleman had hit a steel telephone pole. He was still alive when I got there because I could hear him moaning. I couldn't get the door open. And fire department came, and they told me to go set up perimeter and everything. And I'm sitting there, they trying to get the door open, and he actually passed. I had to go to his wife and give her that sadness. And all she said was, well, he was working overtime. That's all he was doing. He was just working overtime, and that was it. I mean, that's all she said. He was working overtime. And you can see the sadness in her face, but her main thing was he was working overtime. And I started thinking about, you know, because sometimes I get to the point where I like to work a little overtime for money. But sometimes it's not about that. It's about your family. And maybe if he'd have thought about that, you know, I can't second judge what happened, but sometimes we need to think about what we're doing before we get behind that wheel. If you are tired, you know you're tired, you know you just worked an extra job or whatever, go ahead and sit in that car and go to sleep. Your wife might be mad, but you'll be home. My wife has the Facebook, but what I did was I went to different groups, police officer groups, different groups, and I joined them and shared the video. And in doing that, a lot of people come back and say, thank you for sharing this, thank you for sharing this. And they'll have some signs say, sad, sad, and they say, I can't believe that's a real good video. So in doing that, not only the community in Tennessee, but community in Texas, California, Mississippi. Like I said, when I joined about 20 of them, law enforcement, and they accepted me because I was a police officer, and I was sharing. And the feedback that they got, I know they understand, and probably like other officers say, well, I understand where you're coming from. So this not only helps me or even the community, it helps other officers because they know, well, at least there's somebody out there that know how I feel. So that makes them feel better. Because like I said, you hold that stuff in, and there's a problem. So if you have an issue and you know 3 or 4 people that have that same issue and you meet that issue with them people, you can handle the issue better. And I think that's what this film is, this commercial is doing. They see that and they say, well, it is true. I know how you feel. I feel the same way. Then the community and the group that I joined feel the same way. And everybody says, oh, I feel the same way. That sometimes relieves stress. The less stress you have, the better you'll perform.
We put that on the Sheriff Association website, and within less than 2 weeks, we had several thousand hits on that thing. And of course, we have a pretty active website, but I think it's just one of those things that every now and then something comes along and creates conversation. And I believe the way that the Department of Safety and has portrayed this and the way we've put that out there through our impaired driving folks is a testament to the fact that, you know, it's got the attention of the public. And that's a good thing. Yes, it's a good thing.
I know that it states on there, booze it or lose it, but like I was talking to another gentleman, it can also be used for texting, distracting. All that booze or lose it is just what we put it for, but it's for any type of impairment, period. Even falling asleep or being tired, which is the type of impairment zone. It was due to stress, due to some people, you know, there's a lot of officers out there and some of them can handle situations different from others. So the ones that I know at least 3 of them that I personally knew that had that issue. They first couldn't deal with how to deal with certain situations. So instead of having a group meeting or ask somebody about it, they'll turn to drugs, alcohol, and last, suicide. A friend of mine is in the same academy that I was in about 2 years ago, killed himself. And it's due to the fact that I get stressed. I mean, there's times where me as an officer myself feel like this is a lot of stuff to take in. And sometimes you do have nightmares about it. 'Cause like I said, you see all the faces. You'll never forget the faces. And sometimes you'll be good one day, the next day you have a nightmare about it. But you learn to cope with it. And for the ones that learn to cope with it and that's doing it well, that's my thing as far as I'm glad they're doing that part of it, because everybody and anybody cannot be a police officer.
Since 1996, Tennessee's been ahead of the curve on debriefing its officers. We started 1996. We like to say we have a clandestine organization, but it is an organization that's professional mental health people. And we was talking about holding back the tears. I've said this hundreds of times, I'll say it now. An officer who won't cry won't fight. Officers carry a lot of this with them. And so we debrief our officers now. And if an officer even hints the fact that he needs help, because we understand, I guess we're doing another segment now about another tag. It's okay. But all of us sitting here know and realize that you carry a lot of stress with you. You're supposed to have this image out in the public where, you know, you're just Superman or you're Batman, or you're never affected. But they are affected. And I'm gonna tell you this too. That officer delivers that knock on the door. When he gets home that night, he carries those emotions into his own home, okay? And he'll sit down with his wife or his children, and he'll share with them what daddy or mama went through tonight. So it's way beyond just the knock of the door when it ends. Maybe that's just when it begins. And that's when the tragedy the tragedy happened out there. The continuing lifelong tragedy happens after he knocks on that door. That's irreversible for people the rest of their lives.
And on this part he's speaking, one incident I didn't share with it, former police officer, we worked in the same district, friends, he was a Marine Corps like I was, we talked all the time. I had just finished talking to him, and 5 minutes later, he was killed in a head-on collision. I went to that scene and seen him in the car, and the guy that hit him was a teenager. He just came from Chattanooga State, fell asleep at the wheel, hit him head on. I mean, I just got through speaking to him, and went to my duty station and cried. My supervisor sent me home, so you need to go home right now. So I went home, and then like 2 or 3 days later, everybody was involved in the accident, because it was right on Amacola Highway, where's our police station at. They sent us to a debriefing, like you said, and during that debriefing, everybody in there cried, and that helped completely, because like I said, I knew him personally, and I had to actually meet his wife. I knew his wife before, but we had to meet his wife. We talked about it, and she still cried, and me and my wife was all there, and it was just a good thing, because there's a lot of things that people didn't know. I mean, he did a lot of things. I mean, he had just put out a car fire with his fire extinguisher that we don't carry. He had his own in somebody's car that caught on fire. He went to go pick up our paycheck, and somebody hit him head on and killed him. And then when I got the call, they wouldn't tell me. Dispatcher would not tell me. I said, what happened? That's a bad car accident. I said, Alexander just left that. They said, well, I can't tell you. You probably need to go to the scene. You know, they wouldn't tell me. They already knew what the situation, what had happened, and what the outcome was. But I had to actually go to that scene and see the white carpet on top of him with the blocks up under the vehicle. And that's the worst scene, to have your friend in an accident caused by somebody else. And like I said, they got a memorial on that street, and every time I pass that street, I think about them.
I think anyone that watches the video and thinks about that knock at the door and what message is going to be delivered when that door is open will hopefully voluntarily comply with the laws of the state of Tennessee. The seatbelt law, the distracted driving law, the impaired driving law, and speeding. We know these 4 are the top 4 causative factors of crashes. We also know these are driver behaviors. So the driver can change their behaviors. They cannot speed. They can buckle up before they start up. And they cannot drive impaired. There's so many other options today than 15 years ago that a person can choose not to drive while they're impaired. And if I can send one message, I would ask for the public's help in voluntary compliance. I think we've all said and discussed the impact that it has on us as police officers. And that's across the state and across the nation. The other thing is the impact that it has on a family, the personal impact it has on a family. And that family, if they come to the scene, just like Ransom said, every time they go past that scene, they're going to remember that. That police officer or trooper or sheriff's deputy is going to remember that same thing. Every time they drive down that road, they're going to remember, I worked a fatal crash at this site, and I remember the 9-year-old child, or I remember the 65-year-old driver, victimless driver, killed by someone that was impaired. So again, I just ask for the public's help, voluntary compliance, and remember that all law enforcement officers are human, and they share the same grief that families share when they deliver this knock at the door.
One thing, if it's not a voluntary compliance, then they'll get a chance to meet one of the 95 sheriffs in this state who run the next facility that they'll be visiting. If it's not the hospital, be visiting that jail in that county. And we don't want that. I mean, we want everybody to go from point A to point B safely. We know that's not going to be the case. But if this video saves one life, just one life, it's been worth every effort that's been put into it. And we may not know how many lives this video may save, but we hope it saves lives. And that's what we're all about, we're trying to keep us from having to make that knock at the door.
Like you said, if it saved just one life, because that one life could be the president, that one life could be my boss, that one life could be somebody that cured something or invented something. So
just that police officers, sheriff's deputies, and state troopers are human. And again, I can't overemphasize that every officer, whatever uniform he or she wears, they have risen out of that community that they're a part of. They're a part of that population. They've been charged with a duty to enforce the law. They are not different and separate and brought in from other places. They rise out of the same community that we live in every day and that they live in every day. And whether they're delivering these messages or enforcing the law, it is about compliance, not to have a lot of tickets in their category to make them look good. It's not about to prepare them for promotion. It's about voluntary compliance. And if you don't comply, yes, there has to be enforcement. But the sheriff said it correct. We want everybody to go from point A to B safely. But we know that we lose almost 1,000 lives in Tennessee each year in automobile accidents. We're having a terrible July, just to be honest with you. We're about 25 fatalities above what we had last year. It's been a terrible month. A lot of hot weather, a lot of people are out. But again, a lot of things happening too that don't have to happen. Driving under the influence of alcohol or narcotics, distracted driving, and not wearing seat belts. I can tell you from experience as a state trooper, if you can stay inside that vehicle during a crash, your chances of surviving it are exponentially higher, and that seat belt will keep you inside that vehicle. If you leave that vehicle in a crash, it also goes up exponentially that you're going to be killed. Vehicles are built to protect you. You need to stay inside them with a seatbelt during a crash. So we hope that the video sends a message. That's our purpose. We think that we had the right people involved, and now it's up to the public.
Yeah, one more thing. I want to say that July, next few days, 100 days of summer heat, involve a lot of TDOT workers repaving, construction work. And we ask the public to pay attention to these construction zones. These workers do not carry a badge, they do not carry a gun, but they are out there working on an interstate or a road with traffic that is whizzing by just as a trooper or sheriff's deputy or a police officer has someone pulled over. And it's their job to be out there and work on the road. So we ask the public to pay attention to these construction zones and slow down so that the construction workers can have some stability and possibility of surviving if someone veers off and strikes a vehicle where a construction worker is. That's why the speed limit is reduced, to try to give these construction workers, TDOT workers, an opportunity to survive a crash should it happen. So we ask for the motoring public to pay attention to these work zones. The last thing I would like to say is I would like to thank the Davidson County Sheriff's Department for quickly providing a uniform for Mr. Ransom, Handsome Ransom as we called him. And also I would like to thank the Highway Patrol for providing a trooper on very short notice to assist with this, and the Mount Juliet Police Department. It was a very quick and unexpected calls that we made I made to the Lebanon Police Department, the Mount Juliet Police Department, Brentwood Police Department, who all were willing to assist in any way possible. And since Mount Juliet was closer, they sent Officer Brittany to assist, and the Tennessee Highway Patrol sent a trooper, and I want to thank them for their participation in something that I feel is important. And both of those others, the trooper and the city officer, have made that knock at the door. So they felt the pain, or they felt the pain in the past, and they understand what's on the other side.